Welcome back to the John Fredericks Show. Time now is 8:37. On the line with us, Cal Beisner from Cornwall Alliance. Cal, welcome back. It's been a while.
Well, thanks very much. Great to be back with you.
Cal, couldn't have had a better person on today. I guess all the news is about Charlottesville and monuments, but we could speak about the heart. What's the latest that... have you written any books? Is there anything you would like to discuss before we may discuss a little bit about Charlottesville?
Well, I wish I could say that I've written some books, but as a matter of fact, not lately.
Okay.
But we have, at the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation, which is the ministry that I lead, we have continued to publish new papers and articles and the like, following the whole controversy over climate change and various other environmental issues. And our major point is that people need to recognize that the earth is God's creation, and yes, we should take good care of it, but He made it robust, resilient, and self-correcting, and the likelihood that we would be able to cause catastrophic harm, not just simply a matter of local pollution here and there, which can be a very bad thing, but catastrophe for the whole planet, I think, is a little beyond what we should expect, granted that God made it and said that it was very good. Mm-hmm. And then when we actually look at the scientific data, what they tell us is that the kind of global warming that we've seen over the last 50 years or so is not historically unusual. The world warms and cools and warms and cools in cycles driven by natural causes. And yeah, we may have contributed a little bit of extra warmth, but it's probably so small that we can't even detect it. Mm-hmm. There's not a catastrophe to avert, and therefore we don't need to waste trillions of dollars abandoning the magnificent energy system that we have that provides the energy that's necessary to lift and keep any whole society out of poverty using fossil fuels and nuclear. We don't need to spend trillions of dollars abandoning that to switch over to wind and solar, which are unreliable because they're intermittent and much more expensive sources of energy.
Well, China
that just hurts the poor.
China and India, two growing nations, they're building coal-fired plants, and they're not
very
concerned
rapidly
about, so, I mean, and their economies are growing, and everybody always talks about how their economies are growing. Yeah. And it must be because they have the energy to grow their economies.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A long time ago, the only energy really that we could use was energy in the form of food, either the food that we ate ourselves, or the food that other people ate whom we employed, or the food that animals ate, and we used those animals to pull plows and things like that. Now we use vast amounts of energy through machines, and that enables us to get a whole lot more work done, to produce all the different kinds of things that you and I just take for granted nowadays, but that our ancestors, even as little as 150 years ago or 100 years ago, couldn't have imagined.
Well, I think even go back to the 30s, Cal, when the phones were in the house and appliances started coming in, You can imagine, like our fathers and grandfathers, what they felt like. Oh, my gosh, modern technology. Now, the people who want to control the climate have iPads and iPhones and Androids, and they can't live 10 minutes without them.
How much energy those things use, because they all depend on the cloud. And the cloud is not just sort of this ethereal thing up there in the sky. The cloud is thousands and thousands, literally millions of computers running all over the world using vast amounts of electricity, and it's got to be super, super steady stuff. Well, you don't get that from wind and solar that pick up and die off repeatedly through the day.
Cal, let's speak a second about, I'd like to speak to you about one of the latest papers you guys have at the Alliance. However, let's talk just for a minute, because we're in Virginia, and I just went through Charlottesville yesterday. It's a matter of the heart. Is it or is it not?
It really is a matter of the heart. And, I think people on both sides of what's been going on there are displaying what's in their hearts. And there's a great deal of anger. There's a great deal of resentment going on. And that's why, really, the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we can find reconciliation with God and reconciliation with each other through Christ. I mean, this is what people really desperately need. And, you know, I'm a historian. Actually, my PhD is in history.
Okay.
And one of the things that concerns me about this whole growing demand to destroy statues of this person and that person, frankly, I find it concerning because what it means is that we scrub history and we tell only those parts of history that we're proud of. Well, you know, for a long time, Americans were very upset about the possibility that Japan might scrub from its teaching of history the role that its leaders played in bringing about World War II. And we said, no, your people need to know that. Well, similarly, okay, so there are some statues of Southern military men who defended the South during the Civil War. Some of them were actually defending slavery. Others were simply defending what they understood to be our constitutional order. That would include particularly General Robert E. Lee, who was himself anti-slavery and freed the slaves that he inherited. He didn't like slavery, but he did believe that the federal government could not impose its will on the states in things like that. So, we need to remember all of our history. There are parts of it from which we should repent, and there are parts of it of which we should be very pleased. But if we start scrubbing away monuments, we're losing history. And as George Santayana put it, he who will not learn from history is condemned to repeat it.
You know, Cal, I just heard yesterday that Robert E. Lee was asked after the war if it would be okay to erect a monument, and he didn't want it. He did not want a monument to him.
That's right. He didn't want monuments to any of the people involved. Now, frankly, I'm glad that there are monuments. I think there are a lot of honorable things about people on both sides in that war, and there are a lot of dishonorable things about people on both sides in that war. And that reminds us that there is none righteous, no, not one. There's none that seeks after God, and we need Christ's work in our lives to turn us away from our sin.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Well, you're right. You're absolutely correct. I mean, we have a monument for FDR, who had interned Japanese, Italians, and Germans during World War II for security of the nation. We're not going to rip that out, and it's probably one of the larger ones on, in the National Mall area. Yeah. So I mean, you just can't pick and choose. But it's beyond that, Cal. I think what it is, we have a fascist movement that calls itself an anti-fascist movement.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Then we have a white, it's like the oxymoron. And then we have the white nationalists, which they don't know what they are. And then you have what is like a fake Nazi movement because they just want to be Nazis or called Nazis.
Yeah.
But it was like just it's somewhat of a setup to be in Charlottesville, to be where you had gasoline and matches, and you can't tell me that a police department didn't know how to handle that. And then have a car run wild. Why were cars even close to that? Okay. Yeah. And then police told to stand down, and then a governor coming out with a false claim that there was a cache of weapons that, and the police department denies it and says there wasn't a cache of weapons. But it's all about the fact that Donald Trump was elected. They don't want him as the president. They didn't want him when he got elected. They didn't want him sworn in. They've been trying this fake news of Russia, and they figured, okay, we can't get over with Russia. Let's try something else. And this is going to go on until the midterms. And as long as they could block him from doing anything, and there's a lot of evil in this. There's a lot of darkness in this. It doesn't help the nation one way or the other.
Yeah. My wife and I read from the scriptures together every day.
That's nice.
And today we happen to be reading in Judges about Samson. And he was used by God to defeat the Philistines in various different ways, and finally died in the process. And one of the things that we notice about Samson is here was a man who was in many respects pretty promiscuous, not exactly the moral example that you would want for your kids, but God used him to deliver his people from evil. Well, there are people who are just convinced that Donald Trump is an awful person. Whether they're right or wrong, frankly, I don't know Trump personally. How would I know? But I do know that it's our responsibility as Christians to be praying for those who are in office,
power,
and to pray that God will use them, despite the fact that they're all sinners. We all are sinners. So that should be our attitude, an attitude of humble dependence on God, asking Him to use Donald Trump, to give him the wisdom that he needs, to give him the courage that he needs, and to give him, frankly, all the other virtues that he needs, humility and love and justice and so on, to exercise his role as president in a good way. And to resort to violence, to say, oh, he's not my president, that kind of thing, that's not by any means the kind of attitude that Christians should have. And frankly, we don't have to worry so much about what attitude non-Christians have. Reprobate people do reprobate things.
Well, I believe the church is a little lax in this area. I think they should be preaching from the pulpits, just what you were saying. He's the president now, and we have to get behind him and heal the wounds, heal the nation. And he uses almost all the time when he speaks about things, he says, we were under one God, or we believe in our God. And he uses God a lot more loosely than we heard in the last 8 years. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's true. And there are many really solid Christians in his administration, around him, close as advisors. And I think we should take some encouragement from that. There are reports that he himself has really embraced Jesus Christ. Am I God? Can I see into his heart and know whether that's true? Of course not. But I think we should be hopeful, and I think, again, we need to be praying for him.
What's the latest paper out of the Alliance, Cal?
Well, actually, it goes back to something that we were talking about very early on in this segment. We talked about how, coal, oil, natural gas, these fossil fuels are such a great source for energy. And I certainly think that. But there are some people who want to go sort of the opposite direction from the Greens. The Greens want government to subsidize wind and solar. And there are other people who want government to subsidize coal, oil, and natural gas. I think they're both wrong. I don't think we should be subsidizing anything.
Thank you.
Because I think we should let the market figure out what's the best source of energy. So, just recently, Governor Jim Justice of West Virginia has asked President Trump to push for a subsidy to the tune of about $4 or $5 billion to the coal industry, particularly coal-burning electric generating plants in West Virginia. And so I just wrote an article on our website against doing that kind of thing because it's contrary to freedom, and it doesn't allow the market to sort out what are the best sources of energy for this, that, or another location.
I speak about that all the time.
We're even-handed. We're going to shoot down subsidies to renewables, but we're also going to shoot down subsidies to fossil fuels.
I speak about it all the time when we talk about Tesla. They talk what a great company is, but it's all subsidized. It's all subsidized by the taxpayer.
You give me $11 billion, I think I could do pretty well with practically anything.
Cal, thank you so much for coming on again. We appreciate it, and we hope to hear from you soon.
All right. Thanks very much. Take care.
Bye now.